Happy Wednesday, everyone. We'll give everyone just a second or two as we switched, kind of coming from backstage. Hey, Ray, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks so much for joining today, and really excited for our conversation. So we'll give about 10 more seconds for people to filter in, and then we'll kick off. For anyone who's joining via LinkedIn or through AirMeet, please use the chat functionality, the comments, post questions. We'll make sure that we address those live. Again, I think these sessions are always better structured when we have audience engagement and people are asking questions. We've got a great expert here today on revenue operations. We're going to talk about some fun things that we haven't covered on other sessions. So I'm really excited about that. But let's dive in. Ray, quick background. How'd you end up in RevOps? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, great question. It was it's been an interesting journey. So this is my second stint at Thrive. I've been back at Thrive for 2 years, and real quick on Thrive. Thrive has adapted from what most people know as the Yellow Pages. So, and I say most people, depending on your age, you may not have a clue what that is. Matter of fact, the first time I was with Thrive was in 2018, and my son was, I think, 11 at the time, and he said, "Daddy, what's the Yellow Pages?" And I said, "It's that book under the plant." And for us, that's what it was. We're in a Google age, is what we grew up in, and looking for things like that. But still, hundreds of millions of users across the world, ironically. But recognizing that is decreasing every year because times are changing, our CEO had the visionary thought process to, hey, let's adapt. And he created this whole platform of this SaaS program that we're in now. Brought over some folks like our chief product officer, amazing guy from Apple, to build out this all-in-one small business management software platform, where really for our ideal customer profile being that think chucking 5 to 10 trucks plumbing. And if we're lucky, they may have Google Sheets. They're probably not using CRM. They're probably using multiple point solutions, if any, to manage their business. So Thrive is that end-to-end software platform. I kind of think of it as a small business Swiss Army knife for every facet of your business, from helping you get found, building your brand, getting organized, getting invoiced, getting paid, social media management. I mean, you name it. It's like there used to be this old Prego spaghetti sauce commercial, and they'd say, "It's in there. If it's Thrive, it's in there." And it also connects to an amazing marketplace of coexistence with other platforms, so that we can make sure that we're taking care of our customers. So that point being, when I came in, I was strictly sales enablement, and I was helping build out their sales enablement division and also their inbound sales channel. And when I came back, it was still in that role 2 years ago, but with the understanding that this has adapted, this has changed. And I started meeting with lots of people, several people that are part of RevGenius, as a matter of fact, even, and started realizing, hey, this is more than just sales strategy. This is more than just sales enablement. This is more than just sales operations. When you put that revenue word in front of it, it becomes a whole different animal. And I met with, I reported at the time to our chief customer officer, and I made this presentation of, hey, this is what global revenue operations should look like. And they had the audacity to agree with me. And it took a year, and then within a year, they're like, go do it. And I was like, oh crap, I asked for all this. Now what do I do? It's like that.
Now I got to figure it out, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, the coyote used to chase the Roadrunner on the Bugs Bunny commercial, and he never caught him until the very last episode. And he caught him, and then he held up the sign and said, well, now what? And that was me. Well, okay, now what? So we're not so while we're probably 8 years into the SaaS game, we're $1 billion publicly traded company with well over $200 million in annual recurring revenue. So we're not a Series A startup. We're not a Series B startup, C or D. So it was rough, because I would go, and even on places like RevGenius, say, hey, I need help with this. And I'd get somebody that was really cool and could, here's what we're doing. But I'm like, okay, but that's just you. And you're doing all 17 different functions here. Help me understand how to do this in a fully baked company that's a 136-year-old telecom company. And that's how we got where we are today.
Yeah, and I think that's like super interesting, right? Because there's these different maturity models in revenue operations, and there's the maturity is, I always joke, like the tagline for RevOps is, it depends, right? It depends who you report to, or it depends what your function is, it depends where your accountability is, but it also depends on like how you fit in the maturity of an organization. So like with what you're doing in Thrive is like, you're taking this established organization that not only has, fundamentally pivoted kind of their framework, right? What they're offering, like their true identity over the last several years to, meet the needs and grow with the tech, grow with the organization, right? Truly, the yellow pages. I'm at least old enough to know what those were and have to call people from them, so we can empathize on that one. But then also on top of that, you're making this internal transformation of a function as well, right? It's not that you're just saying like, hey, sales ops, we were, selling the yellow pages. This was our route to market. This is our distribution. Here's how we did business. But we're now saying like, all right, this is now how we do business. And here's then how we think about our business as well. So I'd love to learn more about, so obviously you pitched this, right? You pitched this to the business and they bought it. Shame on them. No, just kidding. But like, how did that roadmap look, right? Like what were the incremental things? Like, so when you think about like what revenue operations is to thrive, and I think that's the important thing, is not what revenue operations is collectively, but what it is to your business, and then how you helped kind of get them there.
Yeah, so we did a lot of research, and what we settled on were kind of 4 pillars. And for us, we've defined those pillars as operations, and I can go in each one of these a little bit. Operations, enablement, systems and tools, or the tech stack, and what I call business insights, so reporting, analytics, data science. And so I reported into our chief customer officer at the time. I now report to our COO, but I reported to our chief customer officer, who was responsible for the SaaS business. So on that side, it was very easy. It was just, yes, go do all this. So if you look across the life cycle of the client journey, really for any organization, and these are very broad strokes, but you've got marketing, then sales, then some form of customer success, right? And that's pretty typical in a SaaS company for sure. So each of those had their various parts and pieces of those pillars, but they were siloed. Now, that's not to imply, especially for anybody from my company that's watching this, we all worked really, really well together. I mean, it was just uncanny, the symbiotic relationship we had across these groups. But when push comes to shove, if somebody in sales needs something from their sales operations person, they're going to get that report faster than the person in marketing, who may be also leaning on that person in sales operations to get that same piece of information. So I like to say, one of my business mentors and best friends, he loves to say, everybody thinks change is great for someone else. Yeah. And that's what we ran into a little bit here. It was, hey, this sounds amazing, right up until the time you're talking to, well, hey, how about we take marketing operations, move it into whoa, time out. Not you should go talk to the enablement guys first. And so we had a little bit of that, but by and large, most everybody was conceptually on board with the process. And we just really had to kind of walk them through the why. And I've kind of positioned this as, look, we're Switzerland, we're neutral. And when we take all those parts and pieces, it's relative to ensuring the go-to-market strategy is adhered to at every phase of the client journey. We're not here to say no, but specifically for SaaS, if you talk to my COO, he'll tell you that our mantra for our organization is reducing CAC. So that making sure that CAC to lifetime value equation is exactly where it should be. And what are we doing to lower CAC? So now Molly comes to me and says, well, hey, we want this new tool. Okay, the answer is not no, but before, you own the budget, you own the decision-making hierarchy, so you just go get it. And the problem is there's 17 other Mollys who are also doing the same thing, and nobody's talking to each other necessarily saying, well, hey, are we getting any more Thrives? Are we getting more licenses? Are we selling any more SaaS subscriptions as a result of this? Well, these 3 did. These 4 don't think they will for 5 years, and these 3 just, it was no. So
and how does it impact the experience, right? Like, and it,
yes,
and it's like,
and that's huge for us.
Yeah, and I think, I run into this with companies all the time. It's like, yeah, you can buy whatever tool you need, but like, how do you put it all together, right? And at the end of the day, it's a big puzzle. And like, without the owner, without the stewardship, like, you are essentially just creating a fragmented experience, not only for your customers, but also between your sellers. And I love that you mentioned, like, you're Switzerland, you're neutral. And like, the way that I always think about RevOps is like, you're agnostic to the business, right? Your role is to be consultative. You should think of yourself, as part of the organization, but like, try to remain as a consultant. Try to keep like the more you can keep emotions out of it and bias out of it and like use, true decision making based on experience, based on data, based on, those pieces, like the better outcomes you get, especially when it comes to like prioritization, which I think is one of the hardest things we have to do as RevOps leader, especially cross-functional RevOps leaders. Like,
It
I have
is.
$100,000. How do I spend it? Right? You're gonna make somebody mad. Like your kids are gonna be mad. You can't pick favorites. You've got to be very, very concrete and very, structured in those types of things, especially just where you spend your time, energy, and efforts. And the hard thing that I run into, and I'm sure you do, is like the person who screams the loudest is generally the one who gets the attention. So how do you stop the screaming, right? And like one of the things that we've implemented is Jira. Like I do not respond to people in Slack. My team does not talk to people in Slack. It comes in, it follows a process, it gets steered, it gets prioritized, it gets pointed, and moves forward. And I think like those are really important things, especially as you scale and become a large organization. So curious, like as you made this transition, you folded into teams, like how you broke those biases and like kind of set that new standard of work and prioritization and alignment.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. So for the folks on this call, I would say do that tomorrow. What we would get, and here's part of the problem. So you take my revenue enablement team, and that in and of itself, just changing the term, people thought, well, it's just a different word. I'm like, it's not a different word, because they think so much of RevOps is either sales ops or sales enablement. Revenue enablement includes sales enablement, but it's not just sales enablement.
Right.
It's moving towards that revenue number and that whole go-to-market strategy. But we would get those Slacks all the time, and it was okay. But I mean, we're scaling to $1 billion in ARR for SaaS, not just 200 million. You can't continue to do that. We're a global company, and we would lose accountability because it's similar to that Facebook or Instagram feed where it just gets hidden down 30 high, even on RevGenius, right? You get on the Slack channel and the post's way up here, so I didn't see it unless I scroll all the way up to get it. So we sat down, and it was real simple. Don't overthink it, guys. This is my advice to you. Do not overthink it. We just went into Microsoft Forms and created an intake form and said, what's your request? What's the business case? Who's the approver? And we took all the top ones that we typically get, and we assigned service level agreements to those, saying, hey, if you want, we use SalesLoft, for instance. If you want a workflow in SalesLoft Creator, you want a cadence changed, that's typically going to be, let's call it a 72-hour business hour SLA. If you need it sooner than 72 hours, you need to go talk to so-and-so, the VP, because he's got to come to us and say, I'd like you to take this off your plate so that you can do this one faster. And then you use Jira, we use Asana. We also use Jira in the organization, but my team uses Asana. So everything then goes into Asana. And I'm guessing for you, everything goes into Jira, and it's all managed
That's
there.
the plan.
Yes.
If they want it done.
And then for our viewers, we then went to the senior leaders and said, understand, if it doesn't come in this way, we're not responding. Now, if you're the chief marketing officer and you Slack us, yes, we're going to answer you. Tammy, we're always going to answer you. But
I'm
if
generally
you're not,
putting a ticket in behind your back, though, just so you know.
Yes. And we did that. We have some new folks running our international partner channel, and they came to me directly and said, hey, how do we get this done? I said, you know what, I'm going to put in the ticket for you. But moving forward, here's how you do it. And then you manage to that. And what we've shown everybody is it actually makes things go faster and easier, because as you know, in Jira or in Asana, it's all managed, and we have back-end tie-ins. So if somebody comes up and says, hey, there's a problem with this particular piece of software, we don't do that. That's not what we run. But we send it directly over to IT. It just flows to IT from it because we built that into Asana, and it makes it so much easier. And now everybody knows right up front what they should expect.
Which is, great, right? And again, I think so much of this is like, how do you help from a RevOps perspective improve communication, right? And like having clear process, having, centralization of intake, like helps streamline and disseminate communication. And how do you then build those accountabilities in? If I sat and didn't have this, I'd spend all my time facilitating small Slack requests, like versus being able to disseminate those out, working with the team. So I think that, whether it's Slack, whether it's Asana, whether it's a Google form, like it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you have a process that you can manage and prioritize against. One of the biggest things that we hear from, specifically, I mean, I'd like to say RevOps practitioners. I think I've fourth organization running RevOps. It's been consistent. I think that sets it as a trend, and it's established, is like, you never have enough resources, right? it's always fires. There's always a billion things to do. But if you can't tell the business what those billion things are and prioritize
Right.
those things, it's very hard to advocate for resources. It's very hard to advocate for steering, and it's very hard to prioritize. And so that's where centralization of intake is so important.
It is.
One of,
And, we just
go
did a
ahead.
RevOps. I call it a RevOps executive readout across our executive team just last Friday. And when we got to my marketing ops person, she's like, what should I show them? I said, hey, show them the Asana slide, just do a screenshot from Asana. And what we ended up not doing, but what we found out by looking at that is they're averaging anywhere from 250 to 400 requests a month.
Yep.
So when now my chief customer officer wants to know, what are you working on? There's a link, go look.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we're not getting back.
You can see it in real time, right? And that's the thing
Yes.
that I do with my stakeholders is like, here's our Kanban board. Like you can see when things, like what's in our sprint, what's going to go out. Like you don't ask me what we're doing. Know that stuff's getting
Right.
done and self-serve when you need that. I'm curious, how big is your team, right? So we talk about different sizes of RevOps, like what's like, the number of people kind of on your team specifically.
Yeah, I think we have plus or minus 30, 35 people on my team.
So pretty good size revenue operations team, and sizable investment that the organization's made.
It is, and it's interesting where we've invested some of those resources. We've got a number of people in a number of different roles, and some really exciting things we're doing that I don't see a lot of other companies doing that we're really pumped about, that are making significant impacts in the organization too.
No, that's great. And I would laugh, and I'm going to ask a probably pointed question, like, where do you not have enough resources? So when you think about like, your staffing, or like, where you need more, right? Do you feel like it's in insights? Is it in enablement? Is it in operations? Is it across the board?
Yeah, so I've got to take a quick look at who's in the session, because I saw two of my folks on here, so I want to make sure.
Oh yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble, right? I always think about this as I, run a team. Our team at Deal is a little over 40, almost 50 people in revenue operations. And I always think like, where would I make the investment, right? Where do I feel like I don't have enough manpower behind it?
Yeah, today it would be in our systems and tools pillar, which also for today includes marketing operations. They report into that as opposed to the operations pillar, and revenue enablement. We have plus or minus 1,000 salespeople in the company, and we have a really cool role called the sales effectiveness coach. We rolled out a whole new methodology about, we call it selling and coaching the Thrive way, and we actually have sales effectiveness coaches, and they're the coach's coach. So they're senior leaders, but they don't have direct reports. They're literally, it's like going to do a golf pro, or to a personal trainer. And right now we're at about a probably 1 to 80 ratio, 1 to 90 ratio of sales effectiveness coaches to sellers and sales leaders. So that would be a big one. And then just as the tech stack grows, and in the idiosyncrasies and just management around that, and that's a big one. It's how do you, I'd love to hear from somebody over time. Reach out to me if you have the answer to this. How do you keep that tech stack pillar from morphing into IT? That's what we struggle with.
Yep. And I can give some context there, because my bread and butter has primarily been in kind of the tech pieces, and that's where I spend a lot of the time. And I've watched this, when I was at Granular, I watched we get acquired by Corteva. We moved into a larger company, and we moved into IT, and it was hard, because the trade-off you make is like, you have this great now infrastructure, you generally have more resources, you have stronger processes, but you have delayed delivery, right? You're not typically able to move as quickly as possible. You also lose business acumen with your developers, with your admins, with the people who are less inclined to really be able to challenge like what the business is asking for, right? You get developers who literally build what's on paper versus like having enough of the sensibility of the like organization to really say, oh yeah, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you did this? And you can have some really, really good BAs in there, but again, they sit in IT. And so I think
Mhm.
you convolute the process, right? Like when I kick off, and I've got a team of developers and system admins and those here, like when I kick off initiatives, like I bring them in. Like, what are we not thinking about? Like help be a part of designing the solution here that you're ultimately going to build. And I think like that's where, just because somebody's a developer, it's like, oh yeah, they should be in IT. It's like you're going to sacrifice quality and you're going to sacrifice speed. And I think it results, especially if you do that. And it's
And it
hard
can
because a
happen
lot of
very
the
easily.
times the cost center sits under the IT, right? It's like, oh, this is a platform cost, especially things like Salesforce. And it's like, so this sits under the IT cost center, which, that might be a whole other conversation. You
Yeah.
know, when you think about, the challenges that keep you up at night and like the things that you think about of like, what's next for, RevOps at Thrive, and like, how do we do this better? What are the things that are slowing us down? What are those types of things?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is, we're a SaaS company, so each Thrive is, it's an app, on your desktop, on your laptop, on your phone, on your tablet. So like every other, it's a subscriber, right? So
Yep.
it's making sure that everything we do leads to an additional subscriber somewhere down the value chain. And I try to tell my team every day, especially as you get it, because I started off in sales. So, I mean, it was very easy to justify my job. I make my numbers, I keep my job. It's not as easy once you get into an operational role to say, here's the significant impact I'm having on the bottom line. So, really taking as much of this from a cost center into a profit center as possible. And really every day, what can we do to justify our existence today? And it's not dire like that at my company. They're not on me every day like, hey, what did you do for me today? But it's important that we're not just sucking resources from the company, but that we're providing tangible benefit, because we are a publicly traded company, and
Yeah.
ideally, we want to make sure that, that's my retirement plan. Go buy Thrive, everybody. Is that Thrive stock price? So, what
Right.
are we doing to drive that shareholder value and that customer value? Because we have a unique opportunity. I came from a global background, so when I got into this small and mid-sized business market, it was a very new animal for me. I did it in my first part of my career years and years ago, but we really, I've never seen another company with a solution like this that has the ability to truly help small business, mid-sized business America. So we want to make sure we're always aligning with the mission of the organization and balancing that with profitability and growth,
Yep.
and becoming that, the long-winded answer to the short question, becoming more of a profit center than a cost center.
Yeah, and it's, and I think part of the problem, and like I'd love to get your perspective on like how you show ROI, right? So how do you show the ROI on RevOps, and what that looks like, so that you become that profit center versus the cost center, when so much of like what you do is influence based, and not necessarily one to one with, like, you're not closing deals, right? It's not RevOps isn't closing the deal and not attributed there. So how do you demonstrate that, right?
Yeah, and each pillar has different objectives. So we have, my team knows it's measure, 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 measure. And I think one of my business insights team members is on here, so they're clapping right now. Measure, 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 report, analyze. But beyond the reporting and analytics is, what are the insights from that? And we task
Yep.
every single person with, I don't need you to just give me information. I can out. Fact is, and by the way, there's nobody in danger on my team of this happening to, but I can outsource almost all of that if you're just giving me information. There's cheaper, faster ways to get information than human beings right now. What are the insights from that information? And each group has measurements that they have to adhere to. Whereas something more obvious, like chat, for instance, right now, one of our big initiatives for 2023 is turning chat from a cost center to a profit center. That's a much more easy one.
Yep.
We just, we have an Australian, so there's Thrive in Australia, there's Thrive in the United States. That was one of the quick initiatives we just did. So at 5:01 Central Time every day, chat switches from the United States over to Australia because they're just starting their day.
Yep.
And then likewise at 5:01 their time frame, it's coming, and there's a couple of missed hours in between, but by and large, it's just circular. So there's 24/7 now, rather than just saying, "Hey, Molly, we'll get to your demo tomorrow," and somebody will
Yeah.
contact you with a bot. Now a human being is saying, "Hey, let's talk right now." That's an easy one, right? We can say, "Hey, we turned this on, it drove more sales," or "We A/B tested these bots, it drove more sales." That's an easy one.
Yep.
Revenue enablement, a little bit different animal. We've
Right.
got these these sales effectiveness coaches. They're coaching, and if you know from pro sports or college sports, the offensive coach will go far faster than the star quarterback will. If there's a problem. So every day I'm telling them, what are you doing to prove this? And they have metrics and measurements. And I keep going back to metrics and measurements because it's so important to manage and control and document that. So if you came to my revenue enablement leader today and said, hey, when you implemented selling the Thrive Way to the SaaS team, over 400 people, what was the tangible benefit to the company? And he can take you right into a dashboard that shows you in month one, there was a 57% increase in closing ratios post training and post coaching. Yep. And each one of these sales effectiveness coaches, they have to have very granular reporting structures on what are you doing today? What did you do? And we can see the people that they're supporting in that sales team, what their results are. And that's what they're managed to. So it's measure, and then drive insight and tangible benefit to each one of those things. Operational, it's a little bit not as easy. I mean, we're in the midst of migrating to HubSpot in marketing. That's more of a did it get up on time? Did you get all the email campaigns converted over? Are they flowing? That's a little bit easier one to justify because that is, some people just, somebody has to make the donuts. Those guys are making the donuts. So it's not nearly as sexy as everything else or as tangible. But if HubSpot's running and the campaigns are running, I could take it down the value chain and say, well, how many more sales do we have as a result of implementing that? We haven't gotten quite that far yet.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that I love that you talked about, right, is the measure, and taking that even just that step up one more, right, is defining what the right measurements are. And I think that becomes a big miss in like setting the right expectations up front of for your sales effectiveness coaches, right? Like here's what success looks like, right? This is what I'm measuring to. This is how we're tracking it. This is how it gets defined, and getting that alignment up front. So it's not, hey, I did this thing, now I got to go back and see if it worked. And so like you get that definition, get that alignment, get that coordination is like huge to have right at the top. And I think we miss that a lot, right? Like, and it's because I think we're going and need to kind of like step back and actually be like, all right, what does it, and it might not be quantifiable, right? Like,
not always.
But it's like, let's sit and at least say what success is, or even what is failure, right? Like at what point do we know we call it? Too,
Absolutely.
Especially if you're piloting. And I think that's just really, really important as you are continuously trying to improve and do new things and be innovative. Like you've got to be okay with saying like, this didn't work, and that's a win because we made that call.
And that's such a great, so two things. One real quick, because I saw Jay just posted in the chat. Couldn't agree more. Our mantra and mission in RevOps for our team is to remove the obstacles that keep the company from being successful. So we very much never want to be on defense. We want to be on offense, making sure that we're getting you the things you need in advance and then getting out of your way and then helping you manage to that. But to your point, Molly, we encourage, the company's been really just, thank you, Thrive, for letting us do this. We get to break a lot of stuff. They let us try. We throw so much crap against the wall and see what sticks. But my team's mission, and they get this, and anyone on my team can tell you this: fail fast, fail often, but fail forward. And as long as we're doing those three things, the rest is it all works out. And not everything works out. We came and we piloted an outbound SDR model. We have an inbound SDR model. They're amazing SDRs. World-class closing and conversion ratios. So we said, hey, what if we did this outbound and they cold called, kind of older school, not old school, but a little older than inbound marketing models today. Yep. And they let us go do that. We built a team, we hired up, we got everybody. It didn't work out. So we moved them into other roles and pivoted and went and tried something different. So I would say, especially because I talk to a lot of people who are more of those Series A or B rounds of funding in their SaaS company. So I talk to a lot of folks that there's 30 people in our company. We're RevOps. I'm like, okay, you've got the best opportunity of anybody to go try a bunch of stuff because you're still building that. When you get past B and C, everything's kind of formulated and it's all baked already, and they really don't want to change at that point. So fail fast, fail often, but fail forward.
I love that, right? Like, and it's just, and I know you're, I've worked for publicly traded companies before, and I know you're in a hard situation there too, where you have sometimes the less of the less of the ability to take the risk, right? And make the investment without, well, you're looking at profitability and EBITDA and kind of like those key pieces versus, the
every
Series
day.
A, Series B, you've got this funding and it's like, go, grow, go, grow. You know what I mean? Like, so those are like really difficult trade-offs, especially as you're building something new, as the team. So I do think that, that's a different perspective. When you think about, what you're seeing kind of in the market, or, within RevOps, and like what you're hearing in there, what are the things that really excite you about kind of where this, I don't know if that were this function, it's not really an industry, it's, but this department, this purpose,
Yeah,
this,
it's an evolution, it's a
yeah,
transformation. Because if you still to this day, you talk to some folks in my company, they hear RevOps, they think sales ops, or sales enablement, and that's okay. We're changing that paradigm every day.
every day.
There's thousands of people in our company, and not everybody gets the word, but I think it's the understanding of data and insights. And I will say, for me, one of the most exciting parts of our team is this business insights pillar, because data is king, or data is queen, whichever
Yep.
is more popular. Data rules. And so when I go to, I think he actually might be on the call, Stephen Oxley. When I go to him, he's one of our business insights analysts, and say, "Hey, I'm seeing SDRs are telling me that they're taking X number of calls," and I'm thinking, from being a former sales guy, they should be able to take Y number of calls. And I said, go get me some information on that. And not only does he go get the reporting, but because, and we're really good about this, because he's a former sales professional and a sales coach, like a sales leader. He didn't just go into reporting and analytics cold. He went with a sales background. He says, yes,
Yep.
they are, but let me explain why that's happening. Oh, okay. So the more data, I'm not a data scientist, but I love the data scientists, because they're like, I feel like they're the ones, in that witch's brew, that are stirring the pot and pouring in, a couple of toad legs and the eye of Newt and whatever is in the spell, and it blows up. And now all of a sudden you have the magic. And now we have this magical data to go back to the sales team and say, hey, right now your average response to chat times for I keep using the SDR, are 30 seconds. We believe, and we're about to talk to them about this. So if you're an SDR and you're watching this, we're about to talk to you about this. We believe if you reduce that to an answer time of 15 seconds or less, that it should improve sales from chat by 20%, which should lead to this many thrives, which should lead to this many dollars. That's the cool stuff, is the data. I think the data is cool, and how you use that.
Yeah, and I think, and it tells the story, right? And like it becomes the narrative, and like it helps, build the course. And one of the things that I talk a lot about too is like, data. Elise and I talked about this from Synchrony. It's like data is black and white. Like data doesn't lie, right? What does
Math.
what Yeah, it's just math. And like, I love when, I don't love, but like when people are like, the data's wrong, I'm like, the data's not wrong, the process is wrong, right? If you're telling me the data's wrong and you're not getting the data that you need, you're telling me that our process is wrong and how we're getting the data, right? Like what the experiences that we've created, because right, data is ultimately a byproduct of the process, and the systems
Absolutely.
that then support it. So like, it can't, I was like, I'll never lose the argument when somebody says the data's wrong, right? Because that's not what it is. You might not like the data, but what I hear you saying is then you don't agree with the process.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, I think, and stay with me on this one, I think sometimes the data can be incorrect, but that doesn't mean the data is wrong. And what I mean by that, for instance, our sales reporting, we had 3 different systems all tying into our BI tool,
Yep.
and one of them wasn't piped correctly. So yes, the data was incorrect, but it wasn't wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. So you're missing 5 sales. We'll get the 5 sales, but yes, it follow the numbers. They math doesn't lie. It just, people just don't like the math.
Correct.
Okay, well,
Right? Like,
sell more then.
yeah, and it's like goes back to, make sure you've defined what you're trying to do and how you're trying to measure and what these things look like, and then back to, your point there is like the data strategy. You want to make sure that you have that data strategy, you have that governance, you have those definitions across, the process, the tooling, the tech, all of those things to actually get the right output. And I think
Right.
that's where, it's so easy to blame the data when you don't like what it says versus like really fixing the root cause that's necessary. When you think about, what advice you could give to somebody like who is maybe in a similar situation, right? They're in an established organization, RevOps is not a thing, right? They see the needs for that. What's the roadmap? Like what's the advice you give to them on like how do they build this forward?
So I've talked to a lot of my counterparts. So this didn't apply to me, but I see it day in and day out. I had the luxury. So when I proposed this, we were at a function called SaaStr a couple of years ago. We go every year.
Oh yeah.
So we were at SaaStr, and I met with some really amazing CROs out there. And then I sat down with my chief customer officer, and I said, "Hey, we're missing the boat. This is what RevOps needs to look like." And he agreed. And he even said at that time, he's like, realistically, probably in the next few years, you may not even report to me on this. You may need to report right into the CEO or somebody else more central that can be Switzerland better. And I say that to say this. I talk to so many people who are in these roles because a lot of them start in like sales enablement or sales ops. So they're reporting into sales. That's no bueno. It's not that the sales VP or the CSO is not the right, woman for the job. It's that their focus is sales. And human nature dictates when push comes to shove, I'm going to do what's in my best interest. That's human nature. Yep. Whereas revenue operations goes back to that Switzerland piece. So what I would say is make the case logically, articulate with information, not with emotion, why this needs to be in a centralized group that's not directly to sales or not directly to marketing. I report into our COO, and he runs a global operations organization. So it made complete sense. They just moved me over there, and it's going to help completely accelerate what we're trying to do. So the first thing is make sure they understand if you're reporting into sales, why it shouldn't. And what we had to do with all our various stakeholders was explain to them, you're not going to lose anything. As a matter of fact, you now get more focus because you're a significant stakeholder in this organization. And we're going to make sure when my CMO calls me, that call gets picked up every time. She does not get blown off. When she says, hey, I need this, first of all, she was the first one to give us the marketing ops and really help, Tammy, I love you, really help accelerate this revenue operations change. So of everybody, she's going to get the call first because she helped build this. But helping sales understand you're not losing anything because enablement doesn't report to you anymore. Enablement is now going to focus on making everything better across the entire client journey so that when you go sell this, somebody on the client success team or on the monetization team after that doesn't lose the customer because they did something that was not along the lines of, in this case, selling the Thrive way. So explaining that value chain of how we go across now the entire client journey and that value chain and are actually going to make things better for you, which is why it needs to be centrally reporting as opposed to in one of these other silos. That's one of the biggest things for me is go get the data. And I'll tell you, we didn't, and I was very clear every time I made this presentation, I stole it. I went online. There are thousands of documents. And it's interesting, ChatGPT, I just tried for fun. I'm like, why would I need a revenue operations organization? Explain it to me like I'm 5. And it did. And I sent that to my team on Slack, and they said, this is the first time I've truly understood revenue operations. Like, you all suck. I've made it very clear. You're all gone. No, but there's so much.
It cracks me up because, like, I know like, and ping people, right? Like, and I'll talk about this till I'm blue in the face. Like, there's a network for a reason, right? There are these communities for a reason. Like, I don't know everything, and I don't want to know everything. But what I do want to do is surround myself with people who have had different experiences and have different perspectives and like different backgrounds. Like none of us have woken up and said like, my first job out of college is revenue operations, right? We haven't. They don't teach it in college. Like you've got to learn it. You've got to grow into it. And like, that's where, I look at this as like, how do we learn it? How do we grow? Like, how do we help define it? And I think we're in such a unique situation that we're actually getting to define this as we do it.
It's exciting. It is.
And
It's
yeah, I
growing.
mean,
It's evolving.
we make more mistakes than we probably get successes, but that's how we learn, right? And and most of us first time revenue operations leaders, like we haven't worked for another revenue operations leader, so we're figuring it out as we go. And I think that's what is so fun about this is like, how do you take the pieces from the marketing ops, the sales ops, the CS ops, the products ops, and bring it together, right? And really build that strategy, build that vision, and like move the organization forward.
It's critical that you evolve and you're able to be flexible. That's another thing, be flexible. But one of the other things I would say, and my good friend and mentor, he's the one that brought me to the company originally, Ryan Cantor, our chief product officer, helped me realize this early on, is solve for today with an eye for tomorrow. Because what we
Yeah.
don't want to do is have to forklift this and do it all over again because we didn't plan well up front. So don't just, because it's very easy to come in and be that solver, and then everybody loves you because, hey, you fixed all these problems we've been having across the value chain and the customer or the client journey. But now it's a year later and we've quadrupled and we got to do it again. Don't do that. Then you're the bad guy.
Absolutely. And I think my gross analogy for everyone on the call is like what's going to scab versus what's going to scar. And when you think about, the trade-offs that you make and the tech debt, what's something that you can live with and what's something that you'd prefer not to have permanently, right? And making those investment decisions and making those trade-offs. We always talk about, I think a lot of us at RevOps are generally perfectionists, and we operations people typically are, right? We typically want to make things as good as they possibly can be, and I think that's great. And one of the fun conversations I've had with past team members is like, hey, your A work like is great. Your C work is what we need, right? Like, and figuring out, what the right contribution is, and like what that right
Right.
level is to keep things moving, right? And it's hard to be like, I expect you to do less, right? Your less is good enough. But sometimes you have to make those adjustments to be able to move things
Yeah.
forward and to test and to like build those pieces. So, when you think
Don't let
about
great
kind
get
of,
in the way of good.
right. Yeah, exactly. Especially if your good is 10x better than everybody else's, average, is like, that's okay. What's one thing, and I know you've got some colleagues on the call, so apologies if I put you in the hot seat. Like, what's one thing if you could like sit down and say like, hey guys, like this is one misconception like I'd like to clear the room with, about RevOps or about what we do. Like, what would that be, right? Like, what would be kind of that like mantra of like, if people just had a little bit more of understanding, what would that shake out to?
We're fortunate that we got to build this. I mean, they literally took everything I presented and said, "Go do it." So I'm in a very
Yeah,
unique
most people
position
don't
to be
get
able
that
to do
lucky.
that. You're absolutely right, especially in a 135-year-old company. We're not a baby. We're fully
Yep.
baked. Even at 6 or 7 years or 8 years in SaaS, we're still with well over 200 million in ARR. We're not a startup, and we're profitable. So it's amazing. But is that I just go back to the simple parts. It's that delineation. It almost always comes back to either a sales ops discussion or a sales enablement discussion, and just clarifying that's not just us. Yes, that's a piece of it, but no, that's not. If you look at the operations pillar, one of those four, right? Operations should have marketing ops, sales ops, client
Yep.
success ops. Revenue enablement has those same things for those same groups. So it's not just you know, my guy does very little, if any, sales training in sales enablement. It's really he's a revenue enablement leader now, and it's okay. How does this impact the entire client journey, not just this piece of it? So, helping them understand, because it's easier to say, "Well, you're the sales ops guys." Well, that's part of it, yes, but that's not all of it.
And that's, one of the things that I've joked on is like, one of the things I'll answer the same question, right? Like, I wish we'd take the word revenue out of revenue operations, because I think that becomes like the connotation, right? And like, well, I think synonymously people assume revenue is sales, and that's where you get sales ops, you get, sales enablement. We throw the word sales as synonymous with revenue, and like that's not where we're at as an organization, right? Like And I've joked with Jared at RevGenius. I'm like, just like, can we be experience operations, right? Can we look at this as like, we really run the experience. We look at, how do we improve the customer experience through our seller experience? And when I say seller, I don't mean sales. I mean marketing our sellers, CS our sellers. They are the sellers. And so, because we get like pigeonholed in this whole sales operations, right? And like you talk to organizations that are like, yeah, we do RevOps. No, you don't. You do sales ops,
Yeah,
and that's okay. And that's okay,
that's okay too.
right? Because
Yeah.
like it's important and you need it. But like, and professionally, I think people generally, like when you look at head of revenue operations roles, they look for sales ops people, right? And I laugh at that because I'm like, I would never call myself a sales ops person. You know what I mean? Like, and I would say like, I understand it. I can do it. I can manage it. I've done it, but like, that's not how I look at myself. I'd probably bucket myself as a marketing ops person more than anything, which is, but that's the route that I came up professionally. Right. And that's where I started at. So that's probably my pet peeve on operations is like, it always, and it does, because that's the thing that ties the most to revenue, right? And the dollars, and quantifies it. So,
Yeah.
and I've liked your perspective on like, how do you quantify, your value to the business, and, converting from a cost center to a profit center. I think is just something really important for people to keep in mind, and how you, not to say it's, you should always be quantifying your value, but you should be
Sure.
quantifying your value. You should be measuring
Or it
what
should
you're
at least be
doing.
able to be quantified if somebody asks.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I mean, I think just even for job satisfaction, right? You should be looking at the impact of the work that you're making. I did this great project. Like, what did it do? Okay. Like, it reduced a few clicks. Okay. It reduced a few clicks in Salesforce. That's great. What does that time savings equate to? What does that mean from a productivity? Like, those are all things that can be measured and managed and are really important to do.
It's been an interesting ride, and we're still in the infancy of this. My COO is an amazing guy. He really digs into the numbers more so than I've ever been exposed to. It's just been this amazing kind of sipping off a fire hose PhD discussion with him, and it's really ingrained in me why we need to make sure that we're justifying our existence every day. Not because we're in danger, but because, hey, this gets us more stuff. So the next time we go ask for $1 million investment into a new process,
Yep.
we're much more likely to get a yes than a no, because they say, hey, everything else he's touched has led to this, and this. So if you can't quantify it, and if you can't quantify it, can you qualify it? If you can't qualify
Yep.
or quantify, don't do it. It's just
right. Yeah, it's the 4 box, right? It's do now, do later, do next, do never, right? And understanding what the business impact and the level of effort is that goes into it, and using that as like your North Star to prioritize your work. If you were to give a couple pieces of advice for people who were starting out in RevOps, right? Like, what are things that you maybe wish you knew when you started out in revenue operations, or started kind of formulating what this was? And like, then what advice do you give maybe some of your newer team members, or people who are just kind of getting started in this space?
So the first thing I would say is don't overcomplicate it out of the gate, because I do tend to want to be great, and I have a high expectation of my team. And so when I said don't let good get in the way of great, I'm most guilty of that of anybody on the call. So take the W's where you can and build off of those. I think something that I didn't have when I first got into this business that is so prolific now are groups like RevGenius, for instance, is being able to get on a Slack channel and say, hey, I don't know what to do here. I could use this help. And I've gotten people, I mean, whether we're looking for candidates, whether I need access to a CRO who can say, here's why that pillar doesn't work as well the way you described it. And it's free. There are other ones out there that are paid, and those are great too, phenomenal. But you've got a free resource with thousands and thousands of revenue ops people on it. Use your resources. And my favorite one is, for me at least, and I hope my team would agree with me on this, I'm not the one looking for credit on all this stuff. I have a tagline. I said, I'm just here to sell more Thrives. I don't care who gets credit for it. So if we put up this big project and somebody else gets credit for it. Okay, because you know what?
Great.
My retirement plan is getting fatter and fatter each day, especially for a lot of these folks that are in RevOps and are in these startups that are, they're Series A or B, and they're getting into it with the promise of this mass equity that's going to hit, the proverbial someday. Well, a lot of these companies, the someday never ever happens. So
Yeah.
so take the W's where you can, build off of it, and then you're helping that company get in a better position to actually get that equity down the road.
Yeah, and I love the low ego, right? And I think that that's so
Has to be.
important. And like, but one of the things that like as a manager you've got to do is like you've got to promote your team, right? Like you've got to, especially because so much goes into things. And I laugh, and my team will be, if anyone's on there, they're like, oh yeah, if you say this all the time, I'm like, we're the dream makers, right? We're somebody comes up with a big idea, they come up with a big idea, we're the one who actually brings it to life, right, and delivers on it. And like you've got to make sure like people understand what goes into these things, right? And so they can learn to appreciate it. It's not just magic, right? When you want this great new process built and orchestrated across 12 different tools, like somebody has to sit and actually do it. We don't just flip switches, unfortunately. And so really
Yeah.
making sure to calibrate like what goes into the work. And same way, like I like to think about product and engineering, and like running my team very similar to a prod eng org. We have a roadmap, we work on sprints, we measure the value of what we're producing, we quantify what we're delivering, whether we're building proprietary like a typical prod eng org, or we're building on platform, same thing, right? Is essentially coming out of this. And so trying to keep those same types of expectations. I've had fun, crucial conversations with people before who don't understand the value. And one of the things I always joke back, I'm like, what's the difference between me and your engineering leader, right? Like, let's talk about it. I manage developers, I have BAs. The difference is that I oversee 70 different platforms and they oversee 2 or 3, right? Like, and
Yeah.
whether those are proprietary or not, like that's the difference. And not to mitigate what they're doing, right? But it's very similar, and I think people don't always understand that, as well, especially on like the process and systems components.
Absolutely.
Is there anything, I want to save a little bit of time because we're, I know, wrapping up, but anything else you want to talk about, or that we didn't cover, that you were like, man, if I got to like have my 15 minutes of fame and say one thing that I'm super passionate about?
Our big thing is coaching at every level. If you look at the Patriots, haven't had a great couple of years. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. We haven't either. Good Lord. But if you look at the New England Patriots, it's kind of hard to argue that Bill Belichick's not the greatest NFL coach in history to me. And I think what it shows you is that coaching is critical. And anybody that thinks that he's going to retire with less rings than he has fingers probably doesn't understand how coaching works. So for us is really implementing a culture of coaching at every level. And I just interviewed an existing employee at Thrive this morning, who wants to go over to our team. And she said, what are the 2 keys to success on your team? I said, stay humble and stay hungry. Be humble, be hungry. Because as a RevOps leader, as a RevOps resource, we are here to serve. We are not here to, and Jay asked a question here on the chat about what we'd like more to see from the A's and the closing teams, is understanding, we're here to serve you all. It doesn't mean we're here to say yes every time, Jay, but we're here to remove the obstacles that keep you from being successful. So making sure that open dialogue happens to know where you need help. So for us, it's that humility and hunger and coaching. Coaching is our passion. It's every facet of our organization. We make sure somebody's getting coached. The people that say let's hire good people and let them do their jobs, it's ridiculous. No one ever once said to Tom Brady, go win the football game, buddy. There's multiple coaches, and he hires multiple personal coaches just to make him better. So coaching.
No, I think that's great. And we did have a question come in. What would RevOps love to see more from AEs, closing teams in general, when communicating with you internally, adding value to your role? So like, what would you like to get more from the closing teams?
I would say more, and I think this starts with us, is proactivity, more proactive communication. We like to meet with them regularly. I meet with the sales leaders weekly. the senior sales leaders weekly, and hey, we're thinking about this. What do you think about that? Oh, that's not a bad idea, but I'm not sure we can do this, because we tend to get in these bubbles where we think, why don't you do this? And then they explain the reason we can't answer that call in less than 15 seconds is because there's two bots that get on first that drive that to 30 seconds before it comes to us. Okay, so now we need to fix that. So middle ground is really, and that's just common in life, I think, is middle ground. You're passionate about, you need this. We're passionate about, no, you don't. Well, let's find middle ground and figure it out together.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's good, right? And like good trade-offs and good dialogues, and like, you know, part of business is compromise. And so I think that's good to like understand the passions and work through that. You know, when you think about resources, we talked about community. What other resources do you like to check out and look at? And, you know, don't have to be RevOps related, but, you know, where do you kind of fill your bucket and you go to when you're trying to grow professionally?
So I love reaching out to people that I respect and admire and ask them what they're reading. I do that with our senior leaders frequently. Once a month, I'm asking somebody, "Hey, what are you reading?" And then I go get that and I'll go ingest it. We've got one guy on our team that reads a book a week, and I can't keep up with that. And he has way more kids than I do, so I'm not sure how he's doing that. But read and turn this off, turn that off,
Yep.
and go take your time. I think the biggest thing that I try to do to fill my cup, and I know this isn't exactly what you asked, but I think this
Yeah.
is critical, is I joke, if I could change my comp plan to not getting paid a penny, just pay me $100 per Zoom call, I would bankrupt the company.
Oh yeah, me too. Can we get that? That'd be great.
Right?
I-
So get off the computer, and I build time down on my calendar, whether it's 5
yeah.
minutes between a call, because we work from anywhere, so I work from home, and I literally just walk out the back door and walk around. I have a pool, walk around the pool deck,
Yeah.
just kind of get some sun, try to take calls from the outside. But I find that I use an app called Flipboard. Flipboard's
Yeah.
like a magazine app, and in it you can put in all the things that you're interested in, and then it goes out and culls across the internet all these different news sources and articles.
Oh, interesting.
Apple News does something very similar. Flipboard doesn't cost anything. So that way I know when I go to Flipboard, it's not that it's not like a political thing like left or right. I'm only going to see what
Yeah.
I want to see. It's from a time perspective, I'm getting stuff that I know I'm interested in, and it learns from there. And it, if I'm starting, like right now, I'm starting to get a lot more data science articles because it knows that I'm clicking on those more and reading them. So that's what I love. And um, but yeah, ingest that stuff. LinkedIn's a great resource. The RevGenius is a great resource. And network more, talk to people. Hey, how are you
Yeah.
doing? What are you doing with this? Um, you know,
And I think that the thing that hits me about what you just said though is like the time and space, right? And I talk a lot about that with my team is like you need time and space. You're never going to get what like there's nothing that I can do to provide business value in a 30-minute, you know, break
right.
between meetings, right? Like the things that I'm going to need to do are going to require deep thought, strategic thought, the time and space to like hone that creativity in and that, you know, running those reports and building kind of that plan. And like, you know, if I have to keep context switching between those things, I'm just starting to stop and start over. And so like
Yep.
being really, really purposeful and being good stewards of your time, I think is like huge. Um, Huge in that and like building those boundaries, right? And I would say I still have a lot of professional work to do on that, but progress. So I think that that's great advice. And I'm sitting on a treadmill right now. I've learned that do my best work when I walk all day, and I walk and talk. I don't do it on these because it would drive everyone crazy. But I'm also in the Midwest, so going outside is I don't have a pool and sun right now,
Oh,
but that's
sorry. Yeah,
okay.
I'm in Central Florida. It's rather
Yeah.
warm outside.
Yeah, wish we had that. But anything else to add? Otherwise, you know, really appreciate you being here today, Ray. This is great.
No, my pleasure. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad to talk to other folks around. And if I can be of help to anybody, please let me know.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop your LinkedIn just in the comments so that people have it if
Please do.
that's okay on your end. You know, connect with Ray. Great, you know, wealth of knowledge, especially going through kind of the transition, right? So like taking, a lot of us are building RevOps from scratch. Well, you're building RevOps from scratch, but you're building it on a several $1 million ARR business, right? And
yes,
it's a very different beast when you're kind of taking and putting the pieces together from other departments versus creating the pieces from scratch. I don't have a good analogy for that right now, but definitely an interesting journey, and really appreciate you joining the call today.
thanks for having me. Enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.
Likewise.